75 years ago, the Allied forces worked towards a common goal, defeating the Nazi forces by invading the coast of Normandy. Today, we are fortunate to have the honor of welcoming a man who was part of that great crusade. Louis Graziano is a living piece of history. He is a 96-year-old World War II veteran who is here to tell his story of his experiences during the war. His recently released book, titled A Patriot's Memoirs of World War II, provides a candid look into what it was like to be a young soldier during and after World War II. Louis was part of the third wave landing at Omaha Beach in Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. And he participated in the Battle of the Bulge and witnessed the signing of the Instrument of Surrender at the Little Red Schoolhouse in Reims, France. Not only is his book available in our gift shop, but he will be available to visit and sign copies following this presentation. Mr. Graziano, thank you. Will you do us the honor of sharing your story?
It is a pleasure being here, and I thank you all for being here. I wrote a book, and I thought the book was just going to be for the family. I didn't know all this was going to happen. So I dedicate my book to my wife, Bobby, who was in the service too. She was a staff sergeant, and we were married in the service. I was inducted in the service on March the 2nd, 1943, and I was sent to Fort Niagara, New York, and the first day I got there, captain come up to me and told me I had to cut my mustache off. Not anywhere else, he said. So I didn't know where else was, so I cut it off because I was a rookie then. And from there, I went to Camp Hood, Texas, and the first day I got there, they told me I had to peel 6 bushels of potatoes with 2 other soldiers. And the next day, I was sent for 13 weeks of combat training with the troops. And while I was doing that training, one morning, I come in late for reveille, and the captain made me run around the barracks 20 times for being late. So I was never late again. From there, I was sent to Camp Shanks, New York, for 4 more weeks of special training. And after that special training, I was sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey, for getting ready to go overseas. And when I got there, the night before we got on the ship, I went into the city and made a record for my father. And on that record, I told him I was going to, everything we was going to do to Mussolini when I got over there. And everything I said we were going to do came right to a T, just like I said. Yeah. So then I got on the ship, which was the Queen Mary, and there was 16,082 troops on that ship. And we had the bunks. You slept on the bunks one day and on the deck the next. So we had to go back and forth. I slept in the bunk the first night. I went to turn over and I couldn't turn over. They were so close. So I had to get out and go back in. So I told them that they could have the bunks. I'd sleep on the deck every night. So then they didn't tell us to where we were going when we got on that ship till the third day out. Then they told us we was going to England. So on the way to England, the U-boats were chasing us, and we had to zigzag every 6 minutes, change course, not to get hit. And after a couple of days of that, then a storm came up. The storm was so bad, and the U-boats, so they had to change course and go to Scotland. So we landed in Scotland, and then we had to take a train to England from there. And then when I got to England at the camp, General Thrasher come up to me and he said, I want to send you on a mission to London, and a special mission, and I couldn't tell nobody what I was supposed to do there, ever. And I did the mission, I still hadn't told anybody what I'd done. And while I was in London, the V1s and V2s the Germans were sending would come down, they would whistle, and then all of a sudden they explode. You never knew if you were going to get hit or not. If I was walking down the sidewalk and a bomb would come, I'd lay down and put my hands over my head till it exploded. And I was there for 6 weeks before I went back to Camp Weston. And when I got back to Camp Weston, Captain come up and wanted me to be NCO utility sergeant, promoted me to a sergeant. And I had to put up 50 Nissen huts and 40 tents, and he gave me 35 men to work with me. And then one day, he come out and he says, you got to report to the barbershop. I said, for what? He said, the barber's sick and you got to take over the barbershop. And I says, how do you know I can cut hair? He says, I checked your records and found out you was a hairstylist in New York. So I changed hats and went to the barbershop. And then, I was there for 2 weeks when the barber came back, and I was glad to get back out with my men. And then, had spoken with Eisenhower. He was a great leader, a compassionate man, and cared for his men. He said that the officers had enough rank for them to take care of themselves, so he took care of the enlisted men. And and he was going to send the paratroopers in on the night before the D-Day. He was going to send them in, and then he gave them he gave them all a clipper for them to contact each other when they was on the ground, so the Germans would know where they were. Then he was advised with the officers that he was not, for him not to go with his plan that he had for the invasion. And they told him if he send them in, that it would be suicide for 13,000 paratroopers. After thinking about that, he decided, after 3 days of that, he decided he would go with his plan. But he told them if they didn't send the paratroopers in, that so our soldiers at the beach, they would be like sitting ducks there for 156,000 troops. So he went ahead with his plan and sent the paratroopers in which he prayed it would work, and it did. They cut off the supply line for the Germans, so they couldn't get to the our soldiers coming in on the beach. All right. And then we had the Overlord map, which had 5 beaches on it. It had Utah, Omaha, Gold, Joel, Jonah, and Sworn. And pictures, and on the pictures there was my men on the LSTs with their equipment. And we were on our way to Omaha Beach, and another picture was where myself and my men on the LST, and my great-grandson told me that I looked like Game Face. I thought I looked frightened. So then I went in on Omaha Beach. I was the 3rd wave going in there, and I drove a gasoline truck onto the beach, and when I got on the shore, I jumped out of it quick and got my guns out and my equipment and laid on the ground with the dead soldiers, and I had to crawl up under the cliff. So every time the Germans would be shooting their guns, I'd slide up a little bit closer to the cliff till I made it under the cliff. And once I got under the cliff, I got my flamethrower out, got one of the men to help me because it took 2 to shoot it, and there was a machine gun up on top of the cliff. So I shot the flames up that way and put that all on fire and got rid of that machine gun. And then I shot a flare up in the sky, and the Navy knew what I wanted, and they saw it, and they shot and hit the target, and that put out a few more guns for us. That helped. And then once I got into, then we fought our way all the way up to France, to Reims. And once I got at Reims, Colonel Trasher come up to me and he said, I want you to go and get supplies for the troops, things that we need for our troops to be stationed there, and gave me a French book that had English and French in it. And in that, he had made me a utility foreman. And so I went to the lumber yard where they had the supplies that we needed, and a Frenchman, and I pointed in the book, and he had everything I needed, but he wouldn't sell it to me. So I turned around, went back to camp. I got me 4 more soldiers and went back. And I told him that I wanted that stuff, and he still wouldn't sell it to me. Then I got my .45 out. I pointed right at him, and I told my men to go ahead and load up that truck. And we got everything we needed. And then I told them, we were here to free your country, and you don't want to sell that stuff to us? So I said, well, here's your paper. You take it to the Army and get your money for the stuff we took. So I went back to camp and told the general what I'd done. He says, oh, me, we're going to get hearing for that. I says, I don't think so. I says, because he's afraid that I might come back and get him if he does. So he didn't report us. Then after a week or so, Colonel Boshoff come up to me, and he says, I need for you and one man to go and put special telephone line into General Eisenhower's quarters. And we couldn't tell nobody what we were doing. So I got one of my men, we had string wire up on telephone poles and go through fields that had mines in it. We had to look out for that. And once we got to his quarters, we set everything up that he needed. And we spent the night there with him. And he was real good to us. He's a very passionate man. I think a lot of it. So then I went back to camp. Then one night my captain come in my quarters and asked me to go on a special mission with him. And I said, is that a request or an order? He said, I can put it in an order. I said, let's go. So we had to go from General Patton's troops at Bastogne were cut off for 6 weeks. And we had to go find a 3rd Armored Division that was lost and take them to Bastogne. And it was snowing like anything and cold below zero. So we went out and we found them between Reims and Metz and took them all the way to Bastogne. And on the way, we had to fight our way up there. I got frozen feet on the way, but I wasn't thinking about my feet. I was thinking about staying alive. So we got them up there then. After we got them situated, the major and I went back to Reims. And when I got back there, I had to go to the dispensary because my feet, there was fluid all pouring out of them. They kept me there. They had to put a hoof over the top so the sheets wouldn't touch my feet. I was in the dispensary about 3 weeks before he had let me out. Then they told me I had to get a pair of shoes that was 2 sizes bigger and put 2 pairs of socks if I wanted to get out. So I told my mess sergeant he better find me some shoes. I wanted to get out of there, get back out with my men. So he did, and I got out of there. Then after that, my men at the camp wanted some Class A passes so they could stay out all night, but they had to be in by reveille. And one of the corporals kept coming in late, so he come in one morning, I took his pass away from him, and he didn't like that a bit. He says, come on out, take your shirt off and come on outside. I says, okay. So I went in the office, and the men in there said, you're not going out there, are you? I said, yeah, I'm going out there. They knew I was a hairdresser, and he was bigger than I was. They figured I shouldn't be going out there. So I went out there and I beat the hell out of him. But they didn't know when I was growing up, I lived next door to where the professional wrestlers and boxers would practice, and I was always going in there sparring with them. But they didn't know that. They thought I was just a hairdresser. Then I was walking through the park one day, and I saw the French cop there. I looked at him, he looked at me, and we saw 2 soldiers. We both thought that those 2 soldiers were not American soldiers, but had American uniform on. And he was the closest to him, so I gave him the eye to go ahead and nab him, you know. So he went to grab one of them, and that troop threw him for a loop, and then I jumped in and got him by his arm and twisted behind him, and I could have busted it off. And the other one ran through the park, but there's so many kids and all there, we didn't dare shoot. And so I'm marching him back to headquarters, which was about 8 blocks away. And And he kept saying, comrade, comrade. I says, you say it one more time, I put this 45 through you. So he never said it again, so he understood that. And on the way marching him there, the French people were shooting at him. Well, not shooting, but spitting at him. And I was getting hit too, and that wasn't good. So lucky enough, my buddy was coming by with a weapon carrier, and I stopped him, and I put him in the back of that weapon carrier, and I still holding onto that arm, and I put him face down, my knee on his back, and took him to headquarters. When I got him there, I took his shirt off, and he had the SS tattooed on his arm, which meant Sersu Squad. And the penalty for wearing the uniform was death. So I left it there for them to take care of. All right. The next story would be I was working with the major. He was an engineer, and he was in charge of the city of Reims, France, in the Little Red Schoolhouse. We was working out there in the field, and a general come up and he said, I want you to take those prefab huts and make a big mess hall out of those for the troops coming through to be trained. So the major worked on it about 3 weeks and still couldn't figure it out. We was out there, and when the general come up again after 3 weeks, and he said to the major, you ain't done nothing. He said, well, I'm still working on it. So the general looked at me and he says, can you do it? I says, yes, sir. I says, can you and I step aside? He says, okay, Major, you stay there. So I told the general I wanted him to let me use 2 guards that could speak English and German, and also let me use the German prisoners. He says, you got it. So he left, and the major says, how do you think you going to do it? You're no engineer. I says, I know it, but I'm going to do it. But I wouldn't tell him how I was going to do it. So within 3 weeks, I had the mess hall built. The next thing you know, the general transferred the major out and gave me his job of being in charge of City of Reims, France, the Little Red Schoolhouse, and the war room. And I took care of that situation. Then later on, the general come over and he says, can you build an open air theater for the men? I said, yes, sir. So I located the spot where it was a hill, where they build the seats up here, and you look down at the stage. And as I was digging down there, fixing a spot to put the building, we hit a wall. One of the men says, there's a wall here. I said, well, make a little hole and peek in there and see what's in there. So he did. He said, that's a wine cellar. I said, well, make a bigger hole. Let's go get some. So we went in, and I said, and when you do, get the ones with the most dust on top. That'll be the best ones. So they did, and we had a big time with that champagne. And then, next thing you know, the Frenchman, whoever had the wine cellar, reported to the general. And nobody knew anything about it to the general who done it. So he fixed us up good. What he done when it was payday, he took so much off of, I had 35 men I was in charge of. He took some off of each one of our pay to pay for the champagne. But we didn't care, we had a good time with it. So then I got the stage built, and the general come up one day and he says, you know how to do the acoustics? I said to myself, what the hell is acoustics? So I went and got a book and found out what it was and got it done, and it worked. And then the first one he came up to for entertainment on that stage was Jane Foreman. I don't know how many of you all remember Jane Foreman. She was a singer. And she came and performed. She was in a plane crash, and her pilot saved her life. So she got there with her crutches, and she got a hold of the mic, and I took her crutches and went to the sound room to take care of the sound. And she was a great performer. Everybody enjoyed it. So then later on, one night, myself and my buddy and his girlfriend and mine, we was out, and on our way back to camp, we decided we'd go in the kitchen and cook us up a steak. And nobody was allowed in that kitchen after hours. But lucky enough, my boyfriend's girlfriend was a mass sergeant of the kitchen. So we went in there, cooked us up a steak, and who comes in and catches us? Colonel Boshoff. What are you all doing here? I says, Colonel, how do you like your steak? So that took care of that situation. So you got to use your head, you see. Then one day, my buddy said, let's go to the ball game, watch the ladies play ball. I said, okay. So we went, and I was looking at this one girl. I said, who is that? She was pitching the ball. And his girlfriend says, she's my best friend. Her name is Bobby. And she works in the orderly room. I says, okay. So the next day, I went to the orderly room to talk to her. And the lady girls in there said, who do you want to see? I said, I want to see Bobby. She says, okay, I'll go get her for you. And we talked, and I made a date with her for that night. And when I went to get her, they said, she's already left with somebody. So, nothing I can do but turn around and go back. And then her girlfriends told her that she'd never get another date with me. And she told them she would. So about 2 weeks later, I went and asked her for a date again. And this time she was there. And been there ever since. And so then, we were going together all the time. Then I proposed to her one night at the bar, the Officers Club. And we were married on October the 2nd, 1945. And Colonel Boshoff, he let me use his vehicle, staff car, for us to go on our honeymoon, and we went to Paris for a week. So he was good to me. All right. Then I was in the war room in Little Red Schoolhouse, is where the peace treaty was signed. I was in charge of that room in the White House, and the Germans come in there to sign it, and all of them quiet, nobody smiled or anything, you know. They knew they had to do it, so they didn't like it. And there was 16 correspondents there and about 60 people there. But they tell me I am the last living one that was in that room that night. I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah, all right. Then, after that, Truman shot the atomic bomb. He had shot 2 of them. And I was glad of that because that put an end to the war with for us. Otherwise, if they didn't do that, after we got the German surrender, we were going, within a month, we were going to have to go to Japan and help them out. But since Truman done that, that saved that, and I was glad of that. And MacArthur was the one that signed the Japanese surrender. Now, my son, Butch, he was in the, he was a Marine, and then had 2 tours of Vietnam, and he got 3 Purple Hearts. And his son, Gus, was a Navy officer, and this is his son Butch, Gus. Then his other son, Matthew, is specialist, intelligence specialist, 3rd class in the Navy. And then his wife, Alexandra, is law specialist, 3rd class, and she is currently serving on the USS DeWitt Eisenhower ship. And I thank you all for being here. I don't know what else to tell you.
Questions? See if anybody has questions. See if anyone.
Has anybody got any questions?
If you'll raise your hand and I'll come around. Here's some water.
I'm all right. Okay. What?
Sir, you said something about Camp Wisdom. You've been to Camp Wisdom at some?
Winston.
Winston? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I was going to ask you if you went to Camp Wisdom in Texas. That was my question.
Well, Western.
That was in
Camp
England.
Western.
Okay, and can I ask where that was?
In England.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Raise your hand. Oh, here we go.
Mine is not a question, mine's a comment. I'm Dave Bryan, I'm Captain of the United States Army Armor, 1970 to 74. Brave men like this is the reason everybody in this room doesn't speak German.
Any others? All right. Oh, here we go.
Sir, thank you for your story today. I'm a teacher of world and American history right now, and I guess I'm asking you, what would you want young people in America in 2019 and going forward to know about not just your story, but the story of men like you, the story of those who have served, and the war in general?
Well, I think they need to teach them in school, which they're not doing. There's nothing in the history books now. So that's what they need to do. Start these young ones and let them know what took place.
Thank you for your service. We really appreciate you and all the veterans from terrible time in our history. I have a question. Most of us here have seen the movie called Saving Private Ryan. It was almost unbearable in the first part of the movie when they stormed the beach at Normandy. Since you were there, have you seen that movie, and was that realistic from your opinion?
Yes, it was. Oh, the sun was, the light blinding me there. Yeah, it was realistic.
I wanted to ask, how many years were you and your military wife married?
The what? How long were you married? How long? I was married 63 years before she passed away.
That's beautiful.
I also would like to say thank you for your service and what an amazing story. So, how many years did you serve in the military?
I served 3 years.
3 years? And then where did life take you? Kind of what was the highlight after all your great experiences in the military? Where did God take you after that?
Well, I went back to New York and went back into hairstyling. And I also made Master Sergeant in 23 months, which a lot of them took 4 to 5 years to make it.
And you're now still working as a hairstylist.
And I'm still working in the hairstylist because my women won't turn me loose.
Yeah, thank you very much.